So welcome to this episode of Therapist in Conversation, and as you can see we have some new faces. Before we introduce the new people, what we're going to do is just have a quick roundup of us three stalwarts here, and start with Angela, since you are starting with A.
We will Thanks so much.
I understand that you are not used to being put in there first, so I'm getting you used to it now.
Oh, thanks. I'm Angela Daye. I'm a health kinesiology practitioner. And my company's called Inner Pathways. And I'm loving working on Zoom just now, so I'm able to work with people wherever they may be.
Thank you. And Susan Humphreys.
Hello, I'm Susan and I look after Crystal Souls down in Essex. Holistic therapist for the last 20 years, mobile. I have a little studio and it's nice to see and say hello to everyone.
Thank you. And I'm Leslie Marsh, and I'm a shamanic practitioner, consultant, and various other things, including now a presenter of Zoom magazine shows by the looks of things. So anyway, first of all, let's go with the A's again. Alexandra Fraser Duran, introduce yourself and let us know what you do.
Hi all, my name is Alexandra. I'm originally from Spain and I practice a few modalities. So I'm an intuitive holistic practitioner. I do face and feet reflexology. I also do holistic kinesiology with Bach flower remedies and EFT and other techniques. And the name of my business is after a deceased baby that I lost. So that's called Maya Holistic Therapist. So yes, and I'm also in network marketing, but that's another story. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. Now, Fiona.
Hi. I was asked to jump on by Alexandra just yesterday. No idea what, but I'm a remedial massage therapist, but I do sound therapy and Reiki, and Alexandra and I are doing a dowsing healing course together. And I like the sound of the topic tonight, so that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
Something I'm interested.
So, Sam, you are actually someone who deals with this on a daily basis to a certain extent, because our topic tonight is grief. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself that way?
Hi, yeah. So my name's Sam Youngz, and my company name is Ruby Sam Youngz, which is my full name. So I provide integrated holistic services and natural medicines to help holistic business owners start to overcome and heal grief. And I do this by teaching a skill set with the grief recovery method, crystal and energy healing, and the natural medicines and wellness with Walida. So it helps, my service helps people discover what grief is, build awareness, and helps them to move through and recover and release the emotional ties and pain that's holding them back. I'm actually based in Shropshire here, but all my services since COVID are now online.
Isn't it good that we've got that facility and that we can still use it? It's an interesting situation we find ourselves in, because we are really hands-on kind of people, more or less. And even with people who are like Bonnie, who couldn't make it tonight, a clinical psychologist, she still is there person to person, and I think there is a different energy when you do it person to person. But it's good that we still have the facility to make Zoom work for us. So I just wanted to ask, what does grief mean to you? And I know that's a very open-ended question, but just let's see how we can go there. So just for a change, I'll switch the A's round and say, Alexandra.
I knew you were going to ask that. So I actually read something that resonated with me. So I'm just going to read it loud, and then that explains a little bit. So grief, I have learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in the hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. So there you go. And I think I speak from experience because I have experienced grief several times in my life. And one of the most powerful ones was when I lost a baby, a very premature baby. She survived 5 days, but she passed after that. So it was very difficult because I was pregnant and then I was not. And then you have movement and there was none. And that was extremely powerful and difficult because every therapy I knew wanted to treat me somehow, offer some kind of support. But at that time, every time I went somewhere energetically, nobody could come close to me. It was incredible. A Reiki practitioner tried to come close to me and there was no way. It was almost like myself was in such an anger way that nobody could come. So I just told everybody to stay away, and I needed to do it on my own when I was ready to do that, instead of them trying to tell me what to do, if you know what I mean. So that was quite empowering, because sometimes there was a lady who was also a counselor and she told me to express my anger. And I remember thinking, I don't feel any anger. At this stage, I feel confused and shocked. But she kept insisting I should express my anger. So that wasn't working out very well. So I kind of left it at that. But it is an interesting, because then I went to spend a year with my mum and I met a kinesiologist, which was extremely helpful. And that's why I studied kinesiology. It helped me understand, because I took power in my hands, and I thought, I'm going to do this way, my way. And yeah, so spending a year with my mum was extremely healing, because my mum knew exactly how to nurture me and just be there for me. That's it, really.
Can everybody hear that binging noise that's going on?
Sorry, I think it's just me. I'm going to turn this off, yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. So yeah, it's interesting that I think for particularly these days, and it's been a growing thing that I've found, people think there should be a time limit on how long you grieve for something. And it really, for me, is something that has levels of being. It's different states of being. And it's not as much as that you forget that's what's going on. It's just that real life takes over, the business of being alive and being in life takes over, while the grieving is still going on. But every so often it will catch you out. And I read something earlier on, and what is it? 'Tis so curious, one can resist tears and behave very well in the hardest hours of grief. But then someone makes you a friendly sign behind a window, or one notices that a flower that was in bud only yesterday has suddenly blossomed. Or a letter slips from a drawer and everything collapses. So, you know, it's one of those things that the triggers are still there. So, Sam, how would, if someone came to you and they were exhibiting this kind of situation, people tell me I've got to get over it, but I can't get over it. How does this, I mean, I know it's probably not a one-fits-all situation, because it never is, but are there some parts that you would use more than others, perhaps?
I mean, it's all unique. So it depends where the person is at on their healing journey as to what service they may begin with. And if that person's ready to face that grief and process it. Now, if they are ready to face it and process it, I will suggest to them to start the grief recovery course as what I teach. If they're not ready, then I would work with them on the energetic, natural side first to help bring them back into balance, and process stuff that may be hanging around in the aura and stuff. But grief, as you've just said, it is with us. You know, if you've suffered any loss that has caused you significant emotional reaction and response, that grief, you know, that is with us, and our emotional relationship carries on until our last breath. Even if a physical relationship ended decades ago, we still carry that with us, you know, the hopes, the dreams, that what we wished had happened or what we thought was going to happen in the future, you know, that's with us. And we refer to it as sort of unresolved grief. So when a loss happens, we automatically go into like reviewing that relationship. Oh, you know, I wish I said this, I wish I hadn't done that. Oh, actually that person was really horrible to me, I'm glad they're dead. You know, all of these reactions are normal because every relationship is normal, but it becomes unresolved because it's undelivered communication, that we didn't get to say these things. We haven't been able to say, I love you. And particularly now with COVID, so many people aren't able to say goodbye in person.
Yeah, that's one of my bugbears at the moment with COVID. I think that there's a generation coming up that are going to have a lot of problems with unresolved grief because of not just with the loss of people, but with the loss of their freedoms and having to make a new way of living, even because we were just talking about that earlier, about the different spectrum, that grief is actually a spectrum from the relationships to the actual death and the loss of things. It could be a loss of a job, it can be a loss of just a way of life of being. It's something that when we look at it, we've attached ourselves, entangled ourselves in a relationship with this situation because we're human and we do that. And then we suddenly find that that's not there anymore. So what do you do with yourself? You know, there's a Dusty Springfield song from the 60s, which is kind of my era. And yeah, I'm that old. And, you know, I still buy, you know, there's nobody to go to a movie with. I still buy 2 tickets for this, or I still set the table for 2, that kind of thing, you know? So, I mean.
Well, you could take the flippant approach on that and say, well, it's not a problem at the moment when the cinema's being closed.
Well, this is true.
But actually, from what you're saying there, to a certain extent, the grief of your social life just now.
Yeah.
Because you're not going out on a regular basis the way we were before. As business owners, we're not getting out face to face and seeing people for networking, or until recently, clients haven't been able to come to us. So actually, the loss of human connection, I think, is exactly what you're referring to there, Leslie, with what's coming up. What I would add as well, from what you were saying earlier on, is that you mentioned something about people saying that they should be over it by now. My question on that situation is, well, what's going on for them?
Yeah.
Because if someone's saying to a person who is grieving, snap out of it, you should be over it, whatever the platitudes are, my question would also be to, well, what's going on for them that they can't cope with someone having an emotional response?
A lot of the time, I think, and having seen it happen, a lot of the time I think it's because the other person just doesn't want to listen to them anymore. And unfortunately, they've been the ear, the shoulder to cry on.
Potentially.
And it's kind of, you know, people die. Well, yes, they do, but people you don't know, it's not really going to bother you that much. Until Diana died, of course. Then suddenly there was a switch that turned on where the whole country just went into total hysterics. And, you know, Yeah, did you know her personally? Was she part of your family? No, she was a lovely person, but the people who should be grieving for her are her family, you know?
But there's that word should again.
Well, yeah. And that is it. It's one of those things that's kind of ingrained in in how you were brought up, I suppose. I must remember, I in order to, because I was very wary of people, I don't like people very much at all, which is why I was a vet nurse, because, you know, animals, much
Because they don't talk back.
well, they do, and they actually let you know very quickly whether or not they're happy with you. But they also grieve. They also grieve, and there's different behaviours that come out when they're grieving. But one of my vets at one point had decided that he was going to have a use for me and told me he was going to send me to learn to be a grief counsellor. And I really didn't want to sit with people who were crying and doing things because I didn't know what to do with them. Because when I was brought up, it was a case of, you come in crying to me and I'll give you something to cry for. That was the stuff that we were brought up with. And that was how my mother was brought up. And it was carried on the way down. But in order to stop doing that, I came away and I said, I was working in England at the time. So I said to him, listen, where I come from, grief counselling is, it's dead, get over it. And he kind of looked at me really shocked and then left me alone. So it worked completely, really well. However, being put in a situation naturally that would happen, where, because I was in that situation all the time, really, because I was always the one holding the animal when it was being put to sleep. It was part of my job. And the only thing that I was never really sure about was the throwing themselves at you and enveloping you in a very wet hug. Just and I wasn't used to that. So I find now there's been an evolution. There's been a little bit of change there. But I still understand that people need to grieve. And I think what the difference is that they don't know the difference between grieving and mourning. There's a mourning period, which was set by the Victorians for some reason. But in that space and time, it doesn't stop you from grieving. It just stops you from showing the outward dressing in black, you know, depending on your culture, white. They're mourning, they need time because they have to actually reset, push the reset button and make a new life around that space where that person, animal, job, whatever it is that is not there now has to be. So I think that is perhaps the crux of it, the difference between mourning and grieving in the time frame situation. Anybody, any thoughts?
So are you thinking then that when people are saying snap out of it, get over it, they're thinking mourning rather than grieving?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Because mourning is a time when you're allowed to kind of...
You're allowed to grieve?
No, I wasn't going to say allowed to grieve. You're allowed to have space to be by yourself,
And recalibrate.
Recalibrate. You're allowed to... The wake particularly, it starts off with everybody being so sad, but then by the end of it, they're all having a laugh and a giggle and remembering things. And that's the celebration of the life that went.
Mm.
And that's kind of, I think, part of the tradition that we don't have in this year. Because like only 4 people were allowed to attend the actual funeral, but there weren't that many people allowed to be, because you couldn't go into people's houses. Yes,
I guess from that perspective, it depends on where in the country you were, and it could be a difference of about 20 miles as to how many people are allowed to attend these things. We did go through a death in the family throughout COVID, but actually on the day it happened, we all got together on a Zoom call, and there was about 50 of us, There was a lot of sore heads the next day, so we still had the traditional thing. It just happened a bit quicker because we didn't all have to travel 400 or 500 miles to get there.
Yeah.
And we did have that moment of the telling the stories and the enjoyment of the person's life. It was the weirdest thing to watch a funeral service on YouTube on my TV, mind you, but we did still have the ability, because we were so fortunate, even though we're in lockdown, or we were, that we've got the ability to have video conference chats. So I don't think it's completely stopped, but I guess that's different for every family and every situation. For me personally, I think we were very fortunate, the fact that quickly, let's just get straight on a Zoom call and we're able to be there.
Yeah. Susan Humphreys.
Thinking, because obviously I lost mum a few months ago, and because she had no friends, and the only people that she knew was her older brother, and of course they weren't technical. They weren't used to using Zoom or anything like that. So we've agreed, and I'm still waiting, that when they can actually come out in the community, we are going to scatter my mum's ashes. So I'm still waiting. And it's a bizarre time to actually have to wait. You cannot just go through the service, because I suggested, well, should we go and have a service? And they didn't want to be in the same room with anyone else. And so the restrictions, because they weren't well themselves. So some people's grieving is actually on hold, is on delay. And it's a bizarre experience. But I was lucky that when my mum was called to the hospital, I actually got to say goodbye. So I had 10 minutes, which I'm absolutely grateful for. But as you said, there are many, many people that won't have been blessed with that. And everyone has to find their own way of dealing with the grief. And it is hard. The two people that I've obviously massage, you just have to listen to them, give them the encouragement. You have to allow them to cry, and you just have to help them when they phone and say, you know, I'm having a really bad day today, and you just need to make sure that they come out and actually tell you how they really feel. Some people, I think, feel that they can just cope with it, they don't need any help at all. But then there are some people that just are so lost. They're so lost by not having that person, that animal there, and they can't see a tomorrow. And it's our job as therapists to somehow to pick these people up, get a hold of their emotions, and say, you know, tomorrow is another day. It's a new start. You know, there is a sunrise, and you've just got to be strong and go forward and help them find this new path forward. And it's that encouragement.
Fiona?
Well, kind of what you said, Angela. My husband lost one of his best friends in lockdown, and he was only 46 and died of a heart attack suddenly. And this was quite at the start of lockdown, and he didn't get to do the wake afterwards. He was lucky enough to get to the funeral, to be one of the 10 or whatever. But afterwards, he just was so distraught because he, you know, I don't suppose they thought to get together on a Zoom meeting, but he just didn't know what to do with himself. I think it really is important to have that wake process to, as you said, Leslie, to remember the good times and to celebrate the life. And especially when someone is taken when they're young, you know. And this was his friend. They've grown up together. We've seen each other get married and family, and to just suddenly go. And his little girl is only a year older than my little girl, and it was really just horrible to watch my husband go through that grieving process. But they still feel like they've not been able to have, you know, that coming together. So hopefully it'll happen soon for them. But I've had clients as well that have lost loved ones in lockdown, and it's been really, really difficult, I have to say. Luckily, one of them lived quite near me, so I was able to just go and leave some cake on her doorstep, or I'm always baking anyway, some cookies, and and pop round and just leave them on our doorstep, because I knew she didn't want to see anyone. She couldn't face seeing anyone. He died very suddenly also, and he was only 61. So yeah, it is. It would. It's definitely something that comes up a lot in our life. And I lost my mum when I was 29 very suddenly also, and she took her own life, and that's a whole other thing dealing with as well. So yeah, when you were all talking, I was trying to think about what grief is and how it affects, and I guess it is very personal, very different for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same with anything when it comes to relationships. It's nobody else, no other person can actually feel what you're feeling in the way that you're feeling it, because they haven't got your experiences. They haven't got your life experiences, your understandings of where you are in the relationship, or how much it actually meant. There are some people who have feelings that they keep for so long, and mainly because perhaps it didn't happen for them, or they watched the one that they loved go and marry somebody else, and only too late realised that actually they should have got their finger out and done something about it beforehand. But then they live with that, but they're not allowed to grieve the same way as the person who was married to the one or was with the one. And it's like, personally, my story has the background that my brother was brought up as my nephew, and well, there were two of them, but the one that I'm talking about died when he was 27 in a car crash. And although I knew, everybody else in the family thought I didn't know that he was actually my brother. So I wasn't actually allowed to grieve for him the same way that I could have done if the secret had not been there at all in the first place. Which,
my question on that, Leslie, is the word allowed?
yeah, it is. It's allowed. It's definitely allowed, because part of it is me not allowing myself to do it because of the interesting repercussions that could have come from it. Because once you let go, the truth starts to come out. And I had been keeping somebody else's secret for all of my life. So up to that point, and my biggest regret at that point was Leigh and I had just spent 3 weeks together in between when I was moving jobs, and we'd taken time away. And for a couple of people who couldn't stand to be in the same room as each other most of their lives for longer than 5 minutes at a time without actually hitting each other, the decision to actually go on holiday with him in a car and travel from the New Forest all the way down to the south to Cornwall and back up again to Glastonbury was an interesting one, and camping no less. But I was so glad that I did it. But it was during that time that I realised that I wasn't going to be having him in my life for very much longer. But I almost told him on that trip, but I didn't. And that kind of burned in for a little while. So I get it. I get that there are situations in families, there's family politics, there are things that you have to be a little bit more careful of with some people rather than others, because people do tend to lock things inside. And goodness gracious, if you're the one that spills the beans and they weren't ready to have them spilled, you're in a hell of a situation. And that brings even more anxiety and emotion. And let's face it, what happens when this is coming about is that all the skeletons tend to come out of the cupboards. Pardon the pun. But yeah, so when we're dealing with grief, it's not just the fact that the person died or the job was lost. It's the identity. It's our identity that was entangled with that situation, with that person, with that animal, with that job, with that social life. Who we were during that, how we were. So that, I think, is why it's interesting that when people come to us, particularly when we're doing either Reiki or massage or reflexology, kinesiology particularly, I would suspect, that there can be a breaking of the dam when certain buttons are pushed, when certain energy flows are actually opened up again and allowed to go through. So I think I actually said at one point, what do we do when that happens 5 minutes before the end of the session? Angela.
Thankfully, I'm still on Zoom, so I tend to just keep going. I know I probably shouldn't. I should probably stop at my time amount, but if somebody is in crisis point, then I will continue to talk to them. What I love about kinesiology is that it isn't verbal, so they've not actually had to necessarily dig back up the trauma. They've not had to talk through everything that's going on with them. Their body's processing it. So from that perspective, I've not had any major floods of tears in the treatment room. I've had a couple. I've had some people curse me at the fact that I didn't warn them to not wear mascara. But yeah, but over Zoom, I've not had any that have been majorly problematic from that perspective. They've had massive shifts and they've managed to work through a lot of the stuff that's going on with it. But it's not necessarily come out as an emotional outpouring while on the call. So I've been fortunate from that perspective that I've not had to cut anybody off. And I don't think I would. I think I would probably continue. And I do manage to usually give decent gaps between sessions so that there's
I must admit, I think I went pre-Zoom there. I think I went pre-lockdown there.
Yeah, so I have big enough gaps between my sessions that I've always used to allow for that anyway. But yeah, I don't know if I would send somebody off distraught.
Yeah, it was just thinking about, you see, it kind of folds in itself. Thinking about having one client coming in, and even if you have one client waiting to come in on another Zoom call.
But that's so I have gaps. In most cases, I have a decent sized gap between the sessions, just because you never know what's going to happen. It could be something as simple as your router failing, so you've then got to make up the 10 minutes that you've had to reset your router on a Zoom call. But it's I don't tend to run my sessions back to back because I don't want to make somebody feel as if they've got to drop down, you can't talk to me anymore. I think there always needs to be that ability that if you want to extend the session, we'll negotiate. But yeah, if we've both got time to keep going, then I would rather keep going with a client than cut them off.
Do you think that, well, from what Fiona was saying earlier on, do you think that men are particularly good at holding on to stuff because they don't really know where to put it?
Well, I would say so. I think men are different kind of fish. I mean, again, I talk from what my husband went through at the time we lost the baby. He didn't speak to anybody. He continued, and it's only in the last year that everything just came out. And it was bad because it caused so much friction in our relationship because he had not spoken about it. So, and there were a lot of things that he didn't know about himself. So he had counseling, and I think that was a huge help for him. But the fact that he went to get counseling, that's also a big step because he wasn't going to go there, but he had to. And then I really made him almost, but he was grateful that I did because that created a lot of space for healing, that we could talk to each other and listen to each other in different ways. So that was interesting. I think in therapy, men in particular, when I've had this, recall a few cases that a man who I was doing reflexology, and he came for something completely different. Suddenly he started talking about his dad and war and how he died. And all I could do is just listen. And sometimes the art of listening is really is a skill. We don't need to say anything. We don't need to advise on anything. We just have to hold space for them. And that's all he wanted. He did cry. And he was very grateful for that session. And in fact, I learned a lot because my head was like, should I say anything? And I'm just like, no, just stay there. And it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to say, you know what, I understand you. You know, you don't have to feel fine tomorrow or the day after, but stay with those emotions as long as you need them, and then let them go when you're ready. Mm-hmm.
I think there's also still that slight stigma over wanting to do anything to do with therapy as well, or talking to anyone. So it's making sure that we're all approachable and open to the fact that we're not going to tell someone to stop crying, or in actual fact, when I have worked with people who have had tears, to get them to stop apologising for it.
Yes.
Right. But I think
we don't cry. Yeah, it's eye leakage.
Yeah. It took me 4 years to start, and I haven't stopped since.
Yeah.
Susan, you were saying something. Sorry, Alexandra. Susan, you were saying something, but you were on mute at the time.
So she was just saying that sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger than it is to a friend.
Yeah.
Because if there are not hidden secrets, but sometimes you just want to share your feelings with somebody that won't then tell your best friend or, you know, the family, you know. So sometimes it's actually easier to go, when you're ready, to go and seek help, but actually to talk to somebody you don't know.
That interesting word again that we discussed last week in another call, vulnerability. Being vulnerable, making yourself, offering your soft belly up to the knife of inspection to say, you know, this is how I feel, but I don't know how it is that I feel really.
And to ask for help.
Yeah.
Some people cannot ask for help, or they don't feel comfortable. They don't know how to. Some people cannot talk about their emotions at all. Have never been encouraged as a child to even talk about their emotions. So all of a sudden, to feel all this inner turmoil, or this inner emotional instability, and then to think, how do I deal with this? Well, I can't ask anyone that I know because they'll think I'm weak. They'll think I'm unstable. So it's a bizarre journey that when you have this grief of where, A, you've got to admit you need help, B, where to find it, and then C, have the courage to actually go forward and actually say, I need help.
And there's a lot of social mores on that as well that we still have to get over. You know, there's a lot of social stigma attached to grieving and the causes of it. And I think that in some cases it's a case of we categorize it and what's worth grieving more over or less over. Because
I mean, people do come and they sort of say, well, how do I go forward? How do I carry on? When they've lived with this person, or they have these dreams with this person, all of a sudden then for them just to be cut short, and they think, well, I need direction. Some people, when they've lived with somebody for 20, 25 years, they have no idea when that person all of a sudden has just gone, how to carry on. And if you're leaving, children behind, family members or friends, people that are dependent on you as well, and all these people then look at you to say, right, well, such and such has gone, how do I carry on? My dog has just died, I've lost my best friend.
Yeah, it's a very emotive and rightly so subject. It's a very interesting thing that we have to look at in our own understanding of how we were brought up to have the value what we grieve over or what we don't grieve over. It's just interesting that, I mean, there's so much that happens in life that you see so many people, particularly, and I think, where am I going with this? It's like, I had a thought just when you were talking there, Sue, about part of this, and it was about people who are given the news that their life has got a full stop at the end of the sentence. That they're about to, they have like X amount of months to live, or, you know, and then we have to go through the whole 5 criteria of grief, you know, the denial, the anger, the bargaining, etc., before you get to the acceptance part. And a lot of the time we see people and we understand that there are people who will just give up. There are people who will take things into their own hands. There are people who will then decide that they're going to go out and start living, do the bucket list, do the whole thing. Each one of them has a valid response. The only thing that is not really taken into consideration in that kind of decision all the time is their partners, who grieve silently, who are afraid silently, or maybe not so silently because they could be actually hysterical in the corner, a blubbering wreck, already grieving.
Yeah. Oh, their children.
Yeah.
The people they leave behind. It's, you know, it's, yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting that there are some things that have to be taken into consideration.
But surely that's got to be taken into consideration regardless of the situation, because from what you were saying earlier, no one knows the relationship you've got with that thing, with that person, with that ideal.
Yep.
And every single one of us is going to react differently, because it's not a cookie cutter approach. There might be some similarities, and if there's courses that you've got, that you run through, Sam, that are that you can work with, you've already said you've got to be at a ready point to work through the course. So all that bit leading up to, I'm assuming, is the dealing with it yourself, the unique aspects of your own personal relationship with that grief, with that emotion, and everyone's got their own journey to travel. And I think for me, the point of the earlier comment is, it is okay to not be okay. And actually it's encouraged, because if you don't deal with it, all you've done is put a lid on it, and it's going to fester.
It will come up eventually you have to deal with it. You have to.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
Your body stops you one way or another if you don't.
Exactly.
And generally when that happens is when someone will then do something
for help.
Ask for help, because as humans in society, we as therapists, we are more aware of this, but you know, we have many warning signs that our mind is giving us, our body is giving us, our heart is giving us, but you know, we just keep going. And quite a few of you mentioned, you know, from childhood we are learning all these behaviours and beliefs about loss and grief. You know, some of the things that we go through in the course is like, don't feel bad, don't feel sad, you know, and touched on men, you know, big boys don't cry. So that's instilled into them from an early age. You've got to be just like, be strong for others is another one. Well, that's just so not healthy for yourself, because you're not acknowledging
that you're a person, you've got feelings.
Your feelings, and you're just suppressing it. another, grievers become very isolated, because another sort of belief is that we need to do this alone, we need to grieve alone. And yes, there will be times when we do need to be alone and be with ourselves. But again, from a young age, you could have heard things like, stop crying. If you're going to keep crying, go to your room, or leave them. If someone's just delivered some bad news and your mum or dad are crying, and another sort of common response is, oh, leave them be, they need time, they need space. So then we get this belief that, oh, when I'm feeling bad and sad, I need to be alone, I've got to do it alone. It's so complex because there's so many life events that evoke this loss and grief that it becomes a big ball of messiness going on. Because if you haven't dealt with all of them, it just becomes in this big ball of messiness, and at some point the pressure cooker is just going to go bang, and we will go bang, whether that be through mental imbalance or physical imbalance, or both, in some cases. And I think someone mentioned stigma before. As society as a whole is still quite uncomfortable talking about grief. And even saying the D word, death, we'll say they've passed, I've lost so-and-so, they left me. Because actually coming out and saying that D word, death, died, it is uncomfortable, because it is final.
Got a finality to it, doesn't it?
There's, once you're dead, that physical person is dead. But I don't know if any of you have sort of experienced, like, you could be maybe trying to talk to a friend about your feelings, and they may just change the subject because they're just so uncomfortable about listening to your painful feelings. And for that person, it can be triggering, because if they haven't dealt with their own grief, you talking about your grief can sort of trigger something for them. So, it's very complex and
and I think that was my point at the start of the call when Leslie, I think you said about somebody saying to you, stop talking about it or get over it. My concern is with that person, what is going on for them?
Yeah.
Because it could be exactly as you said. So it could just be, it's triggered something in them. They've not dealt with something. They don't know how to deal with it. Or the concept, somebody's not well, and actually rather than go and talking to them, because they're feeling stressed and concerned about it themselves, they cross the road to walk on the other side of the street to avoid them, because they don't know how to deal with, you've got a terminal disease, whatever it is, I'm going to avoid it. And then the person suffering is suffering more because people are pulling away from them.
It's one of those things that it's true. The most that you hear, the phrase you most hear is, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do.
But as Alexandra said, you don't have to say anything.
Exactly. You just have to be there. You really just have to be there. And actually going up and saying to the person, I don't know what to say.
Or even to say, can I get you a coffee?
Yeah.
Can I something, or company? Do you need to talk about anything?
It's also that, like talking about that book the other day, the 5 Languages of Love. Some people know what to say, and some people just do. Some people turn up with the cake or the stew or the mop and shovel for doing the house out and cleaning out the cupboards and goodness knows what else. I had an auntie who would do that. But one of the interesting things that I saw with my mother of her generation was that after a certain time in her life, she started going to funerals, not necessarily anyone she knew. It was almost as if this is going to happen and all my friends are dying, which they were. They were dropping like flies at the time, but she would spend most of her time in hospitals or at sick beds. And then it just became such a habit of going to a funeral that she would actually, even if she had a vague notion of who they were, she would be off. Where were you? Oh, I was down at the crematorium. It was a great funeral. It was a lovely turnout.
Mm.
And that meant to her, the better turnout you had, the better life you had.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And I think she was probably, knowing my mother, probably looking to see, I wonder how many of the buggers will turn up for me.
Oh, I have seen that in Spain a lot. The women will say, what dress would I wear for that funeral? And then what would I wear for mine? You know, I want to see what they're doing, what they're talking about. And then I find that interesting, isn't it? And fascinating in a way, thinking, I don't care. As long as...
I guess for some people it's that's when people are actually honest potentially about you as a person, but you're never going to find that out because you're not going to be there.
That's right.
Well, I must admit, it was one of my mother's biggest regrets, in that when my sister's husband died, he was 36 when he died of a coronary heart attack. And at his funeral, my mother sat there and said, I never knew he was that liked. There are people here from everywhere.
Mm.
And that was when she said, I regret not giving him the chance.
Wow.
You see, because she didn't like him because he was divorced when he married my sister.
And that comes back to what Sam was saying earlier, the word you can't say.
Yeah. She couldn't bring herself to do it. It was like, that would be making herself vulnerable to being wrong about somebody.
Mm.
So, you know, and I get that. I've got some of it in me. I just, you know, it's no often I'm wrong, but I'm always right.
And I think people, because grief is an emotional response, but comments that people can make are more intellectual. You know, I'm trying to think, like someone could, if it's someone who's maybe elderly, you know, they could say, oh, you know, they're in a better, or was ill, they're in a better place, they had a good innings,
Yeah,
they lived a full life. And whilst that may be actually factually true, for the person who's grieving,
It's not helpful.
There's nothing, and it can make them feel even more misunderstood and more withdrawn because no one's actually taking the time to just listen to them. As said earlier, people just need to be heard without being interrupted, criticised, analysed about what happened, and judged. You know, humans are nosy. We are nosy people. So, you know, people, if someone's there who hasn't got the active listening skills, they might be thinking, oh, bloody hell, what the hell was going on in that family? You know, someone might be sharing something really personal, but someone may be like, bloody hell. And then instead of asking them how they're feeling, you go on to ask them, well, why, who did what? Why did they do that? What happened next? So it's about being there, present, 100% present for that person, and pushing aside your own beliefs, what's going on in your head. And as you said before, you know, just saying, I don't know what to say to you. I can't imagine what you're feeling. But I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And just let them talk. Just let them talk.
Well, what you mentioned before, Sam, about the triggers, I remember when my mum passed 2 years ago, I was speaking to a friend about it and she had to hang up. She was in tears because she was grieving, remembering her dad. So she apologized, rang me again, and then she had to hang up again. So it's almost she couldn't cope with the fact that I was telling a story of how my mum died, and I was okay with it in a sense. I wasn't crying, and then she couldn't take it. She said, "How are you so okay with it?"
it's a different. Then that brings us to a whole different animal, and I think we're going to leave it here for tonight. And we may return to this for the next one and see about how we've gone on with it after thinking about it a little bit. So we've had a few technical difficulties. We've lost 2 of our ladies, but hopefully they'll be able to get on another time. And thank you so much for joining in and being there. And yeah, it's been an interesting conversation.
Which is what we aim for, right?
Yes, it is. Maybe we should have interesting conversations with therapists.
And thank you again, Leslie, for hosting.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I said too much, but there you go. That's usual.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.